Hi, everybody. Big welcome to all. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Bienvenue. Une chaleureuse bienvenue. Je m'appelle Anne Lagacé Dowson, directrice des communications de la Coalition canadienne de la santé. Puis, on va prendre des questions en français, mais ce webinaire se déroulera en anglais. A very warm welcome to all of you on this Monday morning to this webinar entitled Trump's Trade War and What It Means for Public Health Care in Canada. And of course, healthcare being Canada's most beloved social program, we wanted to talk a little bit more about it in the context of this very unusual election now underway. And obviously, healthcare being one of the main things that differentiates us from the United States, to the point where Trump himself mused aloud that perhaps Canadians would like US Medicare. And I think we could hear across the country a resounding no from all quarters, pretty much. So we're very glad that you joined us today because we know you care deeply about healthcare and equity and justice for Canadians and Quebecers. So thank you for joining us. I'm speaking to you from Montreal, or Tiohtià:ke, the unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, or the Haudenosaunee, the Mohawks of the Six Nations Federation. And I also want to mention that this week on Thursday, we're going to have a French language webinar featuring Maxime Fortin, who's a political economist from IRIS, our colleagues at the Institut de Recherche Socio-Économique here in Montreal. So that'll be a first for us, a French-only webinar on Thursday. So if you want to brush up on your French, please join us on Thursday at noon with Maxime Fortin. So today we are super lucky, I mean really lucky, to have two really wonderful people with us, both of them economists who chose to work for the people and not for the banks or the insurance companies or the big consulting firms. So for that, we're very grateful. Jim Stanford joins us. He's arguably Canada's best known economic commentator and director of the Centre for Future Work based in Vancouver. He's a graduate of the University of Calgary and just said to us that he was down the hall from Stephen Harper for a little while. That must have been fun. He was economist and director of policy with Unifor, our largest private sector trade union, much tried in this current period with layoffs at Stellantis and elsewhere. A very big concern for a lot of us. And I am a product of this UAW, CAW, now a proud member of Unifor, which was also my father's union. So I'm a kid who came out of auto and have a lot of respect for Unifor. Jim wrote Economics for Everyone, a short guide to the economics of capitalism, second edition published by Pluto Books in 2015. It's been published in 6 languages. So I suspect some of you have that on your shelf. And Angella MacEwen joins us. She's a senior economist for the Canadian Union of Public Employees, or CUPE, a valued member of the board of the Canadian Health Coalition. And if you go on the CUPE website, chances are you're reading a policy paper written by Angela, whose main focus is the labor market and impacts of social policy on workers. She has an MA from Dal in Halifax, also a policy fellow with the Broadbent Institute and the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. These two people are extremely accomplished, and we're really pleased to have them both with us this morning. So big thanks to Angela and Jim, and I'm going to throw now to Jim, who's going to talk to us a little bit about what he has unearthed on the topic of healthcare in the larger context, and then we'll go to Angela. Then we'll open up proceedings to questions from attendees on the Q&A. So over to you, Jim Stanford.
And thank you very much, and to all your colleagues and activists with the Health Coalition for the fabulous work that you do all the time. And boy, do we need your activism right now. So thank you very much for all you do and for organizing this webinar and inviting me. I'm going to share some slides here, so hopefully this will get going. And just give me the thumbs up if you see that title okay. Excellent. I'll give a bit of an overview of basically what Trump is doing, the lies on which his attacks are founded, and then a bit on the broader economic response, not just the kind of tariff, tariffs, tit for tat kind of thing, but the broader economic response that we're going to need in Canada, including investing in the whole portfolio of what I call our non-traded industries. That is the industries that kind of make up most of our economy in Canada, things we do in Canada by Canadians for Canadians. And guess what the biggest non-traded industry in our economy is? Healthcare. So I know that there are business types who are going to seize on this moment and all of the uncertainty to say, oh, we need more austerity, we need more cutbacks, and that's exactly the wrong response. In the non-traded sector in particular, these are industries Trump can't touch, and these are things that will be the foundation for our recovery from all of this. I do want to refer people to our website, centerforfuturework.ca. We've got a lot of material there on the Trump trade war and other economic issues and resources and videos that you can use in your local chapter or your local union. Please check those out. Obviously, this is an unprecedented moment in world history. We're facing now a global economic crisis of the same scale as the global financial crisis in 2008 or the COVID pandemic in 2020. And the only difference is this one was deliberate. This one was caused by one man and a collapsing democratic system around him, which has removed the normal checks and balances on one man. And unlike, say, 2008, when all of the big players in the world were actively working over the weekend to try and fix the problem before the markets opened on Monday morning, this time Trump isn't even trying to fix it. He wants this. He may not want the stock market crash, but this is indeed the sort of disruption that he was hoping for. We've been trying to understand what Trump is on about. If he has a master plan, is he, the art of the deal, change the parameters so that he can bargain concessions from us, whether it's fentanyl or border controls or defense spending or our digital services tax or apparently the French language, another barrier to trade. And I think we've all figured out by now those were all just pretexts. It's got nothing to do with those things. It's about the unabashed projection of economic and political and perhaps military power to do something that's good for him and the oligarchs who were in the front row of his inauguration. Even if it was just a bargaining thing, and it may get to a bargaining thing, particularly if Trump continues to be pressured by falling stock markets, we're still in trouble because we could sit and bargain away some concessions. We could give away our digital services tax, all 3% of it, which I know is number one on their list of concessions that they want. And he could come back the next week and just demand more. So in this way, Prime Minister Carney's statement that our traditional relationship with the United States is over is absolutely right. And even if Trump woke up tomorrow morning and said, I was just kidding, we'll still have to go our own way here. We have to build an economy that's more independent and self-sufficient. In terms of Trump's claims that he and America are subsidizing the rest of the world, including Canada, because they have trade deficits with the rest of the world, including Canada, it's nonsense. It's nonsense economically. In fact, the U.S. benefits as much from that trade as Canada does. And if anything, Canada subsidizes America, not the other way around. And I'll give you a few examples of that. First of all, the trade deficit itself is a normal feature, essentially a permanent structural feature of the U.S. economy. The U.S. has run a trade deficit with the rest of the world for 49 straight years. And the safest bet you'll ever make, certainly safer than any bet you'd place on the stock market today, is that it will run a trade deficit this year, making an even 50. And there are reasons why it is a deficit year after year after year, mostly to do with the structural role that the U.S. economy plays in global capitalism and the fact that investors around the world, whether it's individual rich people or banks or central banks or governments or other institutions, always want a piece of the central place in world capitalism. So trillions of dollars flow into the U.S. every year in capital flows, whether it's stocks and bonds or other financial assets or private equity or taking over complete companies or buying real estate. Trillions come into the U.S. That gives the U.S. more money to spend than they earn by producing stuff. And that is what allows them to run a trade deficit year after year after year. It's a sign of economic dominance, not a sign that they're being mistreated by the rest of the world. And the trade deficit today isn't even big by historical standards. It's around 3% of U.S. GDP, barely half the size of it was in the 2000s. So it's neither new, it's not an emergency. Trump has tried to claim it's an emergency because he has to jump through a hoop to say this is a national emergency. This is what gives him the power to set the tariff 8 o'clock in the morning and change it again at 2 in the afternoon just by himself. That idea of an emergency, but it isn't new and it isn't an emergency, and it certainly can't be blamed on Canada. This is the 10 largest trade deficits that the U.S. has with its major trading partners. Canada's was $40 billion across all goods and services. That means we sell them 40 billion more than they buy from us. And this was 2023. It shrank last year when we get the full numbers in, and a fraction of the size of the American deficit with many other countries. And that 40 billion is on an enormous two-way flow. Canada and the US have the biggest bilateral trade relationship of any two countries in the world. Almost $1 trillion crosses the border in goods and services going both ways. So 40 billion might seem like a lot. Even in Canada, it doesn't seem like a lot anymore. But compared to $1 trillion two-way flow, there's a technical term in economics. It's SFA as a share of the two-way $1 trillion flow. And I'll let your neighbor explain to you what SFA means. But for every dollar we sell in America of goods and services, they sell 92 cents here. And we are by far America's biggest export market. So if Trump's trying to cripple Canada's economy, he's shooting himself in the foot, because we are their biggest export market. And the trade relationship with Canada is much more balanced than it is with the rest of the world. Mind you, Trump is targeting the whole world, not just us. Unlike Trump's claims that they don't need anything from Canada, that's obviously false. We've all talked about how much they need Canadian oil. 4.5 million barrels a day flows to the US. Over 50% of their world imports come from Canada. And if that was disrupted, no one has actually ever suggested that we would turn off the taps. Daniel Smith likes to tilt at windmills because she's more interested in fighting Ottawa than she is in fighting Trump. But there's never been an idea that we'd cut off the energy. But if we did, then gosh, they would have an energy crisis that would make those old ones from the 1970s. Anyone who can remember the scenes of cars lined up around the block trying to get to a gas station in America, make it look like child's play. But I stress, it's not just oil, okay? They need pretty well everything that we produce. And most of what we sell to the United States is not finished products that have a nice Made in Canada label that show up on the shelf at Costco. 3/4 of what we sell to America is inputs to US businesses. Yes, oil, other forms of energy that come from all provinces, not just Alberta, other natural resources, including critical minerals, forestry products to build their homes, agricultural commodities to run their food factories, and then all kinds of stuff in manufacturing, from industrial materials like steel and aluminum to parts to other products that are used by US businesses to produce the goods and services that they produce and then sell to Americans or to export markets, including Canada. So Trump is now shooting himself in the other foot, okay? He's trying to cripple Canada, their most important export market, and he's crippling US businesses who are going to have to pay more for things that they need to do their business. And this is why the stock market is crashing. Not because of any sort of moral judgment on Trump. There's no morality in capitalism. All of those CEOs loved Trump at first until he actually started to do the things that he said he was going to do when he was running for election. Trump never talks about services trade. He only talks about merchandise, stuff that comes on container ships or pipelines or trucks. Services are the biggest growing area of international trade, and he doesn't talk about them because American companies have a lock on services trade, and they do very well, including with Canada. This is their trade surplus in services with Canada, $32 billion in 2023, and that doesn't tell the whole story, because there's all kinds of services, especially digital services, that we don't even count, let alone regulate, let alone tax. So the actual position in services is much bigger. That would be the biggest trade surplus in services for the Americans, other than Ireland. The number for Ireland is fake. That is a tax evasion situation that's happening because Ireland has a low tax rate compared to other European countries for corporations. All the American giants have put subsidiaries in Ireland to basically shift through transfer pricing and other measures their accounting profits to Ireland so they can pay less tax there. And the flip side of the coin is they then charge themselves, their parent companies, all these services fees like intellectual property management fees and so on. So the Irish number is fake. The Canadian number is real. And we should keep this in mind when we're thinking about how we push back. Trump claims that a trade deficit is a subsidy, that they're giving money to the rest of the world. That's nonsense. they're getting money from the rest of the world, those capital flows that I mentioned. So if anyone has their hand out in the world trading system, it's America, because they need this constant inflow of capital from the rest of the world to support an economy that consumes far more than it produces. And it's capital flows and other macroeconomic factors that explain what the subsidy is. So a subsidy isn't measured by a trade imbalance. There are some reasons, some of them good, some of them bad, why you could have a trade imbalance. If you want to see a subsidy, just try and look for something that is distorting the usual rules of the game. And in that way, there's at least three key ways that Canada subsidizes America through trade relationships and arrangements that vary or are very different from the normal way of doing things. Number one, that oil that I mentioned is all sold at well below world prices. And that works out to about a $20 billion a year annual subsidy that they get. They're not just getting all that oil from Canada, they're getting it on the cheap for various reasons. Number two, those services exports that I mentioned, mostly uncounted, unregulated, especially digital services, and for the most part untaxed, because Meta and Amazon and Uber and Netflix can always shift their profits somewhere else, and they pay almost nothing in Canada. That's why we did a digital services tax of 3%, whoopee doodle. So that's a subsidy. If other companies have to pay tax and you don't, you're subsidized. Third, this is the weirdest one. Those capital flows that I mentioned that flow into America every year, we've done our share of those. We lend the Americans now on a net basis $1.5 trillion. That's the net investment position. Canada used to depend on American capital way back in the 60s and 70s when Anne's dad was working in the auto plant, I think. Now it's the other way around. America depends on Canada's capital and capital from the rest of the world. 1.5 trillion is our net investment position with the US, yet we pay them interest. Interest, dividends, and profits go that way, not this way. It's as if you went to the bank to get a mortgage and the bank paid you interest. Would that be a sweet deal? That would be a great deal. I sign up for that. I sign up for that. And that's what we've got with America. So it goes from bad to worse, or, weird to just fucking insane, if I can use that technical term. And what Trump did the other day with this reciprocal tariff thing on Wednesday, there's no economic logic to what he's doing. But when they actually came out and printed the formula, everybody around the world was saying, what the hell? This can't possibly be true. This is the formula that they printed to explain what the precise level of the tariff that they were levying on every other country. Now, remember, Canada and Mexico escaped last Wednesday. That's because we had already been hit. So Danielle Smith should have been hit by lightning when she stood up and said that Wednesday was a big win for Canada. That was her word. Nonsense. And it wasn't a big win for Alberta either, if she's checked the price of oil in the last day. But at any rate, this was their formula, which is a really weird thing that says the tariff rate on each country will depend on the trade imbalance. That's in the top of the formula, times these two Greek letters in the bottom, times the total flow of imports. Well, here's the weird thing about the two Greek letters. The first Greek letter is supposedly how sensitive purchases of products are to the tariff rate. The second Greek letter is supposedly how much of the tariff rate gets passed through into final consumer prices. Well, what happens if you multiply? And they assumed that these were the same for every country in the world. This is just straight up bizarro fiddling around on the back of an envelope. And the whole world economy is now being screwed by it. 4 times 0.25 equals 1. Okay, I have a PhD in economics. I can do that in my head. 1 times anything else doesn't mean anything. So this is just a joke. So there's nothing. It's just all this is a measure of the relative size of the trade imbalance with each country and in percent. And that's what's going to be the tariff. There's no logical connection. This literally is the economic equivalent of Trump telling you to put bleach in your veins to prevent COVID. That's how off the wall this is. And then on top of it all, Trump just said, we're going to divide it by 2. No rationale for that at all. And he said, because we're nice. So, and he apparently, this is what's now being reported, personally chose this formula out of a whole number of other options that his team was developing for these reciprocal tariffs. It is just batshit crazy. And the fact that he can do this on Monday morning and everyone else kisses his ass, okay, and all of his acolytes around him, all of the broligarchs won't say a word. The Republicans in Congress, there's a few of them now finding some backbone, but they won't say a word. It's just testament to how undemocratic the U.S. has become. So, and then all kinds of other crazy things, including, of course, the Antarctic islands with penguins who got hit by the tariff, because apparently they developed their list of countries against which tariffs would be applied. Again, this is true, based on internet domains, not on the actual measurement of countries. So if you have an internet domain, you got picked out as a country. And there's lots of little islands in the world that have funny internet domains, including ones inhabited by penguins. So in this regard, this is just insane, and everybody knows it is. So what we're seeing in the markets and elsewhere, and obviously the policy response from around the world, is just the beginning. Just a couple of minutes finally, Anne, on what are the impact of the tariffs on the economy. Remember, a tariff is a tax on Americans, so they pay it. It makes our products more expensive. So if they can shift to other sources of imports, they will. Remember, they're tariffing everyone. So you can't really just switch from Canada to someone else to avoid it. What you could do is try and develop a domestic source for it. But as I mentioned, all of those American companies need the imported inputs. So the actual impact on U.S. jobs and employment and so on is very, very hard to see anything positive, and a lot of negative risks. We do have one sign of us still being a separate country. We have our own currency, and that's a damn good thing right now. The dollar will fall, and it has fallen, and that actually absorbs some of the impact. This is a good thing. I know Pierre Poilievre will stand up and say the weak dollar is another sign of our lost decade, blah, 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 blah. It's actually a good thing that the dollar will be a shock absorber. There'll be a broader impact of tariffs rather than just a direct hit to to export industries, including auto. Supposedly, Trump is saying if you want to sell to America, you have to come to America. Here's the funny thing. If companies actually did that, that means even more capital flows to America. That means the U.S. trade deficit gets even bigger. So again, there's no logic to it whatsoever. But the uncertainty that it's created in the minds of businesses is immense. And the surveys of business uncertainty show that businesses feel as panicked right now as they did in the early days of COVID. So this is a very, very serious shock to the world, the stability of the world economy, and we're seeing it. We will have a recession in Canada. There's no doubt about it. I would estimate probably 1 million jobs lost, 10% unemployment, 2 years of declining GDP. Possible hit to inflation. The Bank of Canada, I give them credit when they deserve it, and they deserve it right now. They've cut interest rates 7 times. They cut it again recently, in part because of uncertainty, and I think they'll cut it again. I think we will not see a tough response from the Bank of Canada to any inflation that results from the tariffs, but the Bank of Canada alone can't protect us. So we will see recession, falling incomes, falling revenues. High level, I know you'll hear more from Angela on this, high level impact on public services and healthcare. Because of the recession, you will see bigger government deficits, and then you'll see an austerity knee jerk that comes from some circles. Hopefully not too much from the next federal government. It depends what happens in the next 3 weeks, of course. But there are those out there, including some sitting provincial governments, that will say, we've got a deficit, and the only way to do it is to cut, which of course makes it worse. That makes the recession worse. And obviously, it undermines the well-being of those essential services. As I mentioned at the outset, this is a great time to invest in non-traded industries, including healthcare. This shows you what industries in Canada export what share of their products, and we're all concerned with manufacturing and resources and so on, because they are so trade dependent, and most of our exports go to the U.S. But the main swath of the economy are those big sectors at the bottom, including public services, which hardly depends on exports at all. So we are going to need to respond in the trade policy realm. That includes tariffs imposed back on the Americans. That does cause harm in Canada. There's no doubt about it. But you have to do that if you're going to have anything to bargain with, if and when it comes down to a bargaining situation. We could do much more from a broader approach to other measures to hit back at American companies. This is the logic of deterrence. You have to hurt the other side to get them to stop hurting you. We could obviously put quantitative limits or export taxes on some of the critical things they need from us, including all forms of energy, not just oil, critical minerals, potash, aluminum. Those are all things they need and can't get anywhere else. We could target the U.S. monopolies that are profiting from other aspects of trade. Patents, for example, on prescription drugs and technology like iPhones. Free them up. Those patents were all described in great detail in the North American Free Trade Deal, which Trump doesn't pay any attention to anymore. So why should we pay attention to the patents? Tell the generic drug makers in Canada, produce anything you want that's got a US patent, and other measures. The Buy Canadian thing that we've seen is heartening and has political significance, and it gives people something to do, but it alone will not make the difference. Given the structural integration of the supply chains, most of what we buy from America are not finished products labeled made in America that show up on the shelves at Canadian Tire. Most of what we buy from America are inputs to our economy, and it needs structural measures by government, not individual consumer choices to stop that. Even as I said, if Trump changed his mind tomorrow, we're still in a very, very challenging situation. We will need emergency measures to cushion the blow on the export industries that are being hit first, including aid to the companies to help them survive and help them reorient their operations to different markets and products. Emergency assistance for the workers, of course. And it's a huge piece of unfinished business from COVID that we've never fixed the EI system. So this is the time to do it permanently. But we may also need emergency income supports like the CERB. This will flesh out Pierre Poilievre because in retrospect, with 2020 hindsight, he's been attacking for 3 years the government for paying out CERB and the other emergency benefits, saying they were spendthrift and caused the inflation. That's nonsense. But it's one thing to criticize something in retrospect. It's another thing to say, I'm not going to help the workers today. And I think this is a wedge issue that we should really work on in the next 3 weeks. But there's something much, much bigger here. We need a new national policy for Canada's economy because the old argument, come to Canada, we're polite, we're next door to America, you can sell all your stuff there, okay? That argument doesn't work anymore. So we need a new value proposition, if you like, for what's going to drive Canada's economic development going forward. And I've argued it's going to be like a new national policy that we had in the 1880s, also developed at a moment when free trade with America collapsed and America was trying to take us over. Well, guess what? Today, free trade with America has collapsed and America's trying to take us over. So we're going to need a very powerful strategy, I think, with unusual bedfellows, with government, with business, unions, of course, civil society, universities, to imagine a strategy for building Canada's economy in a very high value, sustainable, technology-intensive way with lots of investment, including infrastructure and public programs and housing and healthcare, all of those non-traded industries that actually make up the big bulk of our economy. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to hearing from Angela and then the discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Holy smokes, Jim. That was a mind blog. That was absolutely amazing. Thank you very much for that. And I just wanted to say our friend Barb Byers just sent us a comment to the effect that she's really enjoying this succinct presentation on the economy, and thanks you for that. Just before we go to Angela, some questions have come in, Angela, so I'm wondering if we can just work them into the conversation with you and with Jim after your presentation. Somebody asking, Keith Lowe asking about the extent of US ownership in the health sector in Canada, implications and strategies. And Jim just mentioned big pharma and pharmaceuticals. And Ken Robinson saying many healthcare products, including dentistry, come from the US. This could increase public costs significantly. How can Canada source from other countries, and how do tariffs affect buying directly from other countries? And I'll just throw it to you now, Angela, because now we've got a lot of beaucoup de viande sur la planche, as we say in Quebec, a lot of stuff on the table now. So over to you, Angela.
Yeah, absolutely. That feels like a full first year class in economics in 15 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so as soon as the tariffs, even though they were paused at the beginning of February, as soon as that threat, it became obvious to everybody that it was real and it wasn't just, he wasn't rambling, or he wasn't just rambling. We saw an impact on business investment in Canada. We saw businesses saying, that they were going to maybe not expand, or they were going to pause operations, and we saw a bunch of notices with layoffs. So it does mean that there is kind of a permanent shift in Canada, as Jim was saying, this whole deal where Canada's main thing is like, oh, invest here and we can sell to the States under this free trade agreement, that's gone. And that has been how our economy has been oriented for the past 30 years, at least, right? With that Brian Mulroney election, where we decided to go that route. We need the U.S. both as a source of business investment and as a customer, and that has really shifted and changed. And so we need to rethink our industrial policy to be more independent from the U.S. And what can we do to make that happen? We are things are better now than it looked like they would be in February. And the main reason for that is because these broad tariffs that he threatened, the 25% tariff, are only on goods that are not rules of origin compliant under the trade deal. Now, each country calls it a different thing. In Canada, it's called CUSMA. In the United States, they call it the USMCA. So to be rules of origin compliant means that for the most part, it was produced in one of the three countries or one or more of those three countries. But for specific products like textiles or auto, there's very specific rules. So the rules around what it means to be rules of origin compliant, the US Customs handbook on this is 136 pages long. So it's very technical, it's very detailed, it's very complicated. But for example, Nutrien Limited, which is the potash producer in Saskatchewan, has put out a statement and said their potash is CUSMA rules of origin compliant. And so it is not getting hit with that 10% tariff. It should be going into the United States tariff-free. Lots of other goods that hadn't faced a tariff before should be able to fairly quickly prove that they are rules of origin compliant. So forestry products, mining, those types of things. So there are fewer of our goods that are getting hit with that tariff than maybe we thought would be in February. So that is a relief. But we have steel and aluminum tariffs of 25%. We have auto tariffs that went into effect on April 3rd of 25%. And the auto parts tariffs are going to go into effect on May 3rd. So all of these are big hits to our economy. And so we will see unemployment, we will see government revenues fall, we will see businesses more and more. The Stellantis plant announced that it is going to go on a pause. So we will see more and more of this delay manufacturing, because the pieces that are going to get hit are more manufactured products where there's more inputs from other places. Like I said, textiles, the H&M, like all of the clothing companies saw really big hits because a lot of those are produced not in North America, they're produced outside of North America. So anything that relies on inputs from the rest of the world is really going to have a challenge. Those businesses are going to have a challenge, because the theory that Trump is using here is that if he makes it more expensive to produce things outside of North America, then more businesses will locate here. But he's just wiped out tons of equity in the stock market. And so people don't necessarily have the money to be investing and expanding right now. So you can't kind of turn on a dime to create some of those inputs. And so what's going to happen is higher prices for consumers and unemployment. And so the double impact of this is going to be really big for both Canadians and Americans. And as we've seen, the market is so integrated for both manufacturing, for agriculture, for even like oil. Stuff goes back and forth across the border, and the supply lines are super integrated. So rethinking what part of manufacturing is happening in Canada. And what is happening with that equipment. If that company goes bankrupt, now that is an undervalued asset that could be bought up by private equity, sold off, and we've lost additional jobs and additional pieces of our supply chain in Canada. And so we really need to sit down and think about where will public investment in parts of our supply chain, in parts of our transportation network, in communications network, make a difference in order to have Canada be more self-reliant, more independent, and be able to withstand this product. In the chat, we've shared, CUPE put together a declaration of what we think should be the priority for governments going forward. We are very concerned about governments, privatizing pieces of our infrastructure, as a response, and continuing to underfund post-secondary education right now across Canada is in crisis. Healthcare system is in crisis. Education has been underfunded, and so, as Jim mentioned, what we expect governments to do is to pull back a little bit on some of this spending that was already being underfunded. And that's exactly the wrong approach. If we go back to Keynes, if you want to support those rural communities, if you want to do what Jim's talking about doing and support the homegrown economy, you want to invest in the anchors, the employment anchors in those communities that are going to keep people working, that is going to keep money circulating in those communities. And that's in the schools, that's in healthcare, that's in creating jobs, building new houses for people. That's creating jobs, building publicly owned infrastructure. And the advantage with publicly owned infrastructure is that it's built in the public interest. So if we're investing in ports, in airports, in high-speed rail, in roads, we're building them where it makes sense for the economy as a whole. The approach of the current Mark Carney, the current administration, is they seem to be offering low-cost loans to the private sector to build infrastructure that makes sense for the private sector, and unfortunately, that tends to not to be built necessarily in the broader public interest. That's going to be getting built what somebody thinks they can make money off of, which isn't what we need right now. The other piece that's really important is there may be more tariffs to come. And pharmaceuticals are one industry that has been targeted as a potential tariff. And so we know we've just kind of got the toehold in a pharmacare system in Canada. We do have a pretty big generic manufacturing industry. We could do more to support that industry and to support the production of pharmaceuticals in Canada, as Jim mentioned. In all of our trade negotiations with the United States, they keep trying to extend this patent length for the pharmaceuticals so that the higher priced goods are on the market for longer. We could reverse some of those decisions around how long we're protecting those patents so that we can produce lower cost goods in Canada and support that manufacturing. We have also seen several provinces, Alberta and Saskatchewan, I know, are offering more private surgical clinics instead of doing it publicly. And this is often a shell game. It's the same surgeons, it's the same equipment, it's the same nurses. Sometimes in Ottawa, they were doing something where it was even the same operating room. They were renting out the operating room in the public hospital on the weekend, and they were paying more money to do it. So we're seeing this move towards privatizing pieces of the healthcare system and private actors trying to get in on the profit where they can. We can expect that to accelerate as governments are looking for ways to try to play this shell game and move stuff off their books. And private actors are coming in and trying to grab a piece of that pie. So there's this threat that we see where there's going to be a lot of pressure to go the wrong way, to privatize the system, to offer incentives to the private sector to do what needs to be done. But we really need to have the courage of our convictions and to double down on what has made Canada so successful, which is the public infrastructure that we've built, the public services that we have, the public healthcare that we rely on now. Those jobs are going to be key to keeping rural areas alive, to keeping communities going, and it's going to be key to building a more self-sufficient economy as we go forward.
That's great. Thank you very much, Angela. And thanks to people who are putting their questions and comments in the Q&A. I just want to reassure there's several people who said, wait a minute, is this going to be available to watch later? I need to watch this later. I missed some of it. I want to be able to take a second look. So yes, it will be up on our YouTube channel for sure. And we'll put some clips up maybe on our socials as well, because this is really excellent and rich content. And we're really we're very, very happy to be doing this today with both of our guests, Angella MacEwen and Jim Stanford. I just wanted to go back. Pharmacare has been a big focus at the Canadian Health Coalition for, I mean, literally decades, right? So I'm wondering, there have been a couple of questions about it. I mean, I'm talking to you from Montreal. Along the 40, the Trans-Canada, there used to be one pharmaceutical company after another all along the highway, and they're all gone. Is there a chance that we could get those companies to come back? Like how could we use pharmacare as leverage politically and socially in this current context, because that has been a long-standing, like Canada's the only healthcare country that doesn't have pharmacare. That's number one. And number two, we did make the little inroad that you mentioned, Angela. We got 2 types of medications covered. So I wonder if you could tackle that question first and foremost, and then I guess well, let's just start with pharmacare and then see what you where we want to go. So Jim and Angela, can you just jump in very specifically on pharmacare? You mentioned patents. I think that's really of importance. So let's go back to you, Jim, on that.
Well, we certainly could build a stronger pharmaceutical industry in Canada, and using our proactive government procurement through a genuine pharmacare program and other tools. Now, back when you had all those plants along the Highway 40, that was in a way something that had been negotiated in return for some of the initial strengthening of patent laws under the earlier free trade agreements. The quid pro quo was, give us the patents and we'll put some research and production jobs in your country. And it was never fulfilled. There was some investment and some work that occurred, but it wasn't permanent. And then now in more recent years, that's disappeared. So we have an immense proud history as developing medicines in Canada. And we could absolutely find another way to do it and to inspire pharmaceutical manufacturing in Canada, but under a very different framework. You know, instead of it being, I'll bribe you with a big patent that gives you monopoly power, and we'll hope to get some, you know, crumbs from that. Actually say, we're going to produce these medicines to make people healthier, and we'll pay for the cost of producing them. So come here and do it. That's a very different formula, but we absolutely could do it if we were brave enough to try.
So Jim, Steve just sent in a question in. That's right. You said you actually said 1 million jobs lost, right? You did say that 1 million, possibly
Yes.
up to 1 million. This is like mind-bogglingly terrible for the working people of Canada, and that means a lot of them are going to lose access to their private insurance coverage for drugs, among other things, right? They're just going to lose their access to all of that. So I'm wondering, how should some aid package, CERB-like intervention include some coverage for dental and prescription drugs and stuff like that? I wonder, Angela, do you want to jump in on that?
I mean, that's an excellent point about the benefit of public services and universal public services, is that it acts as an automatic stabilizer in times like that, and it cushions the blow when we have these types of crises. It also makes it cheaper for companies to hire workers in Canada. It's way cheaper to hire a Canadian worker because healthcare in the States is super expensive, right? That's an extra added cost for American employers. The other thing that we could do in Canada is spend more money on research and development in our public university system. We already do some of that work, but we could focus on more research and development in publicly owned institutions, and we could rebuild, we could decide to focus on manufacturing specific drugs and kind of build on that. There was like a little bit of a move towards that in Montreal under Trudeau, during COVID, harkening back to kind of the days of when we had publicly owned pharmaceutical manufacturing under the University of Toronto there.
Not labs.
But yeah, Cannot Labs. That would require kind of this focus, more of a wartime focus of what we used to do, where C.D. Howe had crown corporations kind of in every industry that operated in that industry, so that government understood how it worked and what it would need to do to support that industry as an industrial strategy.
Is that, I mean, I've heard this mentioned, I can't remember who said it. We basically kind of need a wartime footing approach to what's happening here. I wonder, Jim, do you want to comment on that? Like, what would that mean? What would that look like from where you're sitting?
It's funny how often we've used that we need to be on a wartime footing argument in the last few years. We used that argument around COVID. We've used that argument around decarbonization. And yes, it is certainly relevant here. You know, it is kind of a C.D. Howe moment, if you like. You think back to World War II and the idea that active industrial planning and price controls and, you know, very strong government guidance for an emergency response could play a role in helping Canada through these challenges, I think is valid. And you know, for those of us on the left, I think something that we have to grapple with there is if it is a C.D. Howe moment and we do have a national policy that's required, business is going to have to play a role in this as well, which means we're going to have a strategy for how we enlist business in this process with a combination of carrots and sticks. But you know, it's not going to be a socialist economy in the near future to get us through this. So if indeed we're going to have a situation where there's more planning, more domestic procurement, more focus on domestic markets, et cetera, then we're going to have to imagine a way that we get business to the table and sign on to some of these things. And that will be tricky because, of course, there's many in the Canadian business leadership who see this as an opportunity to try and enforce Trump-type policies in Canada. On the other hand, there are others in the Canadian business community who have a different view. And I think we have to be a bit strategic in how we approach this. But the wartime planning that we had in Canada was very good for business. They made huge profits, but it also built industry and ended the Depression and got us to full employment and laid the groundwork for our post-war labor relations system. All of that in a few short years in a C.D. Howe moment then. So, you know, I think there's a lot of potential for that now, but I think we have to be careful about imagining how that's going to occur and picking our battles in the process of it.
So after the war, guys like my dad and all the other guys who survived and came back and weren't too traumatized basically said, okay, so we had all that money to kill people and smash Europe into a million pieces. Now we should use some of our money to actually build up a welfare state, right? And what we're seeing now is the tearing down of much of that welfare state. And I wonder where is the political, like you're saying, we have to be strategic. Who is the C.D. Howe of the current moment? Like where are our allies?
That's a great question. I think there are allies on the council, so we had a conversation. CUPE had a conversation with Unifor, and Unifor has a good relationship with some of their employers who are looking for some types of public investment that they need to support the work that they're doing. So even before Donald Trump, there was a union-led advisory table that Justin Trudeau put together, and one of our recommendations was to bring back something called sector councils, which is more of a place to have tripartite conversations between workers, businesses, and the government. And sector councils have worked well before to kind of hammer out some kind of arrangement that works well for sometimes the smaller players in the industry. You don't always hear on, you know, the news or from the big organizations what the smaller Canadian-based employers are talking about. You hear what multinationals want to say, right? Or maybe Jim Bussilly, whatever he's rambling about. But you don't necessarily hear what the people who are actually employing workers in across Canada, what they would need to make stuff go.
And you know, I don't think of the Canadian ruling class as being very brave or very principled, right? Or even particularly concerned about the well-being of its workers. But now we're in a new reality where we're all under threat. I wonder, what do you think, Jim? Do you think there is leadership amongst those people? Like Angela is telling us about the smaller ones, and I hope that's true. I don't see a lot of evidence of it from just recent. I just saw Balsillie in the Globe and Mail blabbing on about something ridiculous. I don't know, where is the leadership?
Well, we shouldn't count on the leadership being brave or principled or caring about their workers. I don't know why you would expect that to be the case, Anne.
Naive.
What we can count on business to be interested in is how can I make money? And if we create a framework in which they can make money in the course of a national policy type plan that is going to redevelop the engine for Canadian economic development going forward on grounds other than exports to the U.S. as the leading force, then I think we'll find some willing takers. And you know, it means having a vision from government that we will try and direct this. We won't just cut taxes and cut red tape and wait for the free market to decide. It'll have to be guided, and again, a mixture of carrots and sticks. The one thing to keep in mind is, you know, I think a lot of Canadians obviously feel passionate about pushing back against Trump, but feel scared about pushing back against Trump for the obvious reason that they're 10 times our size. But I think that to some extent we forget a couple of key features of our economy. Number one is that point I made earlier about how much of our economy does not depend on trade. You know, something like close to 80% of our GDP is produced in Canada and stays in Canada. It never crosses a national border. That doesn't mean the export side isn't important. It is very, very important. But it isn't the end of the world. You know, if we have a recession for 2 years and lose 1 million jobs, that's bad. But something like that has happened several times in Canada's history, and we survived it, and we found a way to recover. And I'm not being Pollyannish to say that the harm won't be there. It will be. But we have got the foundations to build an economy on a different framework. And the same goes for the size of our economy. Canada is the 10th largest economy in the world. We've got $3 trillion of GDP. We've got 40 million workers, consumers, and citizens. We've got enormous natural resources. We've got enormous human resources and a proven ability to, you know, to some extent, it's been damaged by the polarization of the last few years, but to some extent come together and solve problems. So, you know, we can absolutely build an economy. When Donald Trump says Canada is not viable as a country without the US, he's absolutely full of it. We are. And I think keeping some of those things in mind and thinking about what would need to come together to build an economy on a different footing than it has been built in the last 35 years. In the last 35 years, our primary industry policy has been trade to the US. And we warned at the time, those of us who were protesting against Mulroney's first deal, we warned at the time the risks of that. And now we've been proven right. So now we have to have a vision for how to build an economy on a different, somewhat more balanced footing. We're still going to export to the US. They still need all that stuff, and we will still sell it to them. But it will be a different orientation for how the economy is going to develop in the future.
So it's cold comfort to think that in the 80s, when we protested in 1988, the free trade election, like so many of us were saying, let's not hollow out, let's not, going back to 1968 with, you know, George Grant and Lament for the Nation, the Canada as the branch plant. This has been a theme on the left for a while, but now we're at this crisis point, you know, and that cliche about a crisis is an opportunity. I mean, is it possible that this could be, in fact, a very good thing for Canada, Angela?
I think we could come out of it stronger. I think when I think about industrial policy and what like my ideal industrial policy looks like, it is public investment in stuff that enables the private sector, that enables creativity, that enables some of that stuff to work. I teach a model of the economy as a pie, where the foundation is the environment, and then there's households, and then there's the public sector, and then the icing on top of the cake is the private sector. So you need that strong foundation all the way up so that you can have that vibrant private sector. And there are some really clear things that we could invest in right now. Jim mentioned interprovincial trade barriers. That was a big focus of conversation after the initial Trump tariff threat, and that's largely about deregulation. That's what they mean. They mean deregulation and privatization, actually. And I've written about that at CUPE. If people want to Google that, I'm sure it'll come up. But when StatsCan interviews Canadian businesses and asks them what their biggest barrier to interprovincial trade is, they say the cost of transportation and the availability of transportation. So building public low-cost east-west rail, building east-west connections between energy, building electrifying things. What can we offer more opportunities for electrification, help people electrify, renovate their homes, offering more subsidies like Quebec does around the electric car infrastructure, those types of things, right? Communications, instead of buying from Starlink, we have Telesat in Canada. So can we focus on doing more of that communications, publicly owned communications, that allows the private sector then to have affordable communications like we have in Saskatchewan, because there's a public crown corporation that offers that telecommunications. Investing in universities and research, investing in healthcare so that people are healthy and it's affordable, building affordable housing so that people can be, when you can afford to live somewhere, you can take risks, you can be more creative, you get more support for the arts, for entrepreneurs when housing is affordable. So there are these types of investments that are absolutely like no-brainer investments that will help the whole economy and will create jobs in the short term and will enable private sector to grow within Canada, that governments have this opportunity to step up and do that work and make those investments. But some of the regulations that were removed from the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, which is the interprovincial trade deal, are around protecting Canada Post's monopoly right to be a letter carrier. Canada Post has a logistics infrastructure in Canada that goes places no private deliverer of mail goes. So we should be enhancing Canada Post's ability to transport goods across this country, not undermining their financial basis, right? They removed something around protecting domestic investment in telecommunications, which we should be making sure that when our assets, critical assets in our economy right now are undervalued, that we're not creating some kind of, windfall sale for private equity to come in and gobble it up. We want to protect domestic investment in key industries. And they've done exactly the opposite there. So we really want to be careful that the rhetoric and the actions are matching. This is really my concern, because oftentimes we can get the right rhetoric out of liberal politicians, and it tends to be the liberals that do this because they're in the middle, right? They get the right rhetoric, but then their actual pieces that they do it enhances privatization and opens up avenues. And then I find what happens is they're like, oh, well, we tried the thing that you said we should do and it didn't work. But like, that's because they didn't actually do the thing that we said. They didn't do the public investment. They said they were doing it and they privatized it. So it didn't work.
I'm wondering if we don't actually need our own civil society war room featuring Jim and Angela, among others, right? Like because I think we need to be doing more of these kinds of webinars, more of these kinds of serious conversations around these issues. I mean, there was a big Hands Off Canada demonstration in Montreal, of all places, yesterday, featuring well-known figures from the nationalist camp of the center left here. So something big is going on across the country. When you see that kind of demo in a place where sovereignty is so well lodged in the public consciousness in Quebec, suddenly even Quebecers are rallying around the flag, their own and the Canadian one. I wonder, like, what is, just in closing, I would ask you both if you could prescribe one or two key actions that we could all take in this current moment as we wait for the next, shoe to fall. Let's go back to you, Jim.
Well, I think more of those demos that happened yesterday, and supporting your organization, whatever it is, if it's a trade union or a branch of the Health Coalition or any other citizens group, to say we, first of all, believe in Canada as a goal and as something more than the northern appendage of a continental economy. And we're prepared to fight and sacrifice to keep it. And I think that upsurge in political opinion and political action will have repercussions. It's already having repercussions. We've seen that in the drama of the federal election, and it can have more repercussions up to and after the election. So wherever you live or work or engage with people, speak out and be active and get out there.
Yeah, and we have seen that with the Charlie Angus Roadshow, the Elbows Up series of events that he's holding, among other things. So I think there is something afoot. I think old organizing skills are being revived right across the country.
And I should point out, I wanted to say this at the beginning, thank you for the role you played in the Pledge for Canada and the other initiatives that were coming around. That was so important to get the ball rolling, and now we're seeing it happening all over.
No, I think it did start the ball rolling. It wasn't me by any means. It was Alec Himmelfarb and John Cartwright and Charlie Angus, among others, and Craig Scott. So they deserve a lot more, much more.
And too, so don't be too modest there. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Angela, did you want to tell us what you think is a sort of short-term prescription for people on this call?
Yeah, sure. So I shared in the chat, or I asked Tracy to share the Montreal Declaration. So I would recommend people go look at that and see what we've published. And if you like it, sign it, share it. Ask your candidates about what kind of commitments they're making to investment in the public sector, in public infrastructure, in public services, to preserve the kind of Canada that we want. We don't want to be giving pieces of this off as bargaining chips. Along that line, the Council of Canadians is organizing around water. Water is a big issue. Trump has said he wants to turn on the faucet. The Canadian American Free Trade Deal doesn't have protections for water in it. And so that's a concern that people might want to organize around in their communities. You can check out the Council of Canadians and the work that they're doing on that. CUPE is also concerned because we have Canada is one of the only countries that managed to preserve public water and wastewater services. Europe is all privatized. And we want to make sure that this moment, cash-strapped municipalities aren't, pushed into a situation where they're privatizing water and wastewater. We think that that's really, really important thing to protect. So yeah, look into the issues and what people are doing. Protest, ask candidates about it, make sure that they know what you're concerned about, and that there will be public pressure to make sure that this recovery looks like a worker-centered recovery. One thing that we didn't explicitly say, but this is not just an attack, Canada or the United States on Canada, or the United States on the world. It's actually there's a worker element here as well, which is why I was really glad to see when Mark Carney announced reciprocal tariffs that he isn't tariffing the Mexican portion of the cars. It's just the US portion. So we're trying to be in solidarity with global workers here. And we want to think about our response in that way as well, to be in solidarity with workers worldwide, not just being protectionist as Canada.
We're up against the clock now, but I just want to close with a quick comment from the Q&A from Isabelle Emery, who says she is relieved and found it so interesting to hear that 80% of the Canadian economy is basically us, and that we are autonomous in that sense, and that we can do all kinds of things inside our own existing parameters. So that's a very big reassuring thing in the face of this storm that we're in. And I just want to say an absolutely fulsome thank you to Jim Stanford, and invite people to go to Jim's Center for Future Work website based in Vancouver. There's a gold mine of material there, and I really, strongly recommend. And also check out CUPE's document, the one that Angela just referred to, but also their online material. They're kind of exemplary union in that sense. They have a lot of.
We have a bunch of materials related to this at cupe.ca/tariffs. So we're trying to collect everything that we're writing under that grouping.
And CUPE goes back years in terms of its interest in and sustained focus on public education, and deserves to be, lauded for that. And I just found this absolutely great. Thank you so much to both of our speakers today, and to all of you on attending. I'm sorry we can't get to everything, but I think we might have to invite these two people back before too long. If they're game to come back on, we'd be so overjoyed to have you both. So thank you very, very much, Jim Stanford and Angella MacEwen.
Thank you, Anne, and the whole coalition.
Thanks,
and everybody out fighting this good fight. Thank you very much.
It's really wonderful to actually meet you in person, online, kind of. And thank you very much to the attendees for being so attentive, and so active, and so intelligent, and caring so much about our social safety net. And a big thanks to Tracy Glynn for stick handling all the tech. And we'll be back before too long on Thursday with Maxime Fortin to talk about the federal election and the Quebec budget in terms of healthcare. That's on Thursday. And then we have Danielle Martin, the doctor who went and spoke before Congress and challenged the right-wing, the congressman who was trying to tell her that Canadian healthcare is inferior. We're going to be doing a webinar with her about how she sees the current, the place of healthcare in the current election. So stay tuned for more. And once again, big love and thanks to all of you for being here today. Take care, everybody.